Merry Meet, Annie here. This video is about my book of the year. I had lots of questions when I was collecting questions from people for my Q&A videos about whether I keep a book of shadows. I'm not keeping something at this point in my life that I think of as a book of shadows, although my book of the year is darn close to the same thing. The book of shadows that I had was dedicated to the group work I did with the circles I have been with. Each circle has had its own book of shadows. And unfortunately, my very first book of shadows, which, I would give my eyes teeth to still have it, there was a point in my life at which I actually had been diagnosed with something that I had been told might take my life. And I was not in a living situation where I felt comfortable with what would happen to my book of shadows if something happened to me, because I was, at that point, solitary, all the members of my circle having moved away. So I actually destroyed it. And nowadays all I can think of is to have that kind of record from the 70s would be amazing. I do have a record. It's the journals I've had throughout my life, and my magical journey is definitely recorded, but not in an official book of shadows. That is relatively long gone. The good news is I obviously made it through that rough time in my life, both moving on to a healthier relationship and recovering my health. So, book of the year and what it is to me. It's going to be very much like what many of you do call your book of shadows. It is a collection of all of my magical focus, my correspondences. It basically captures my journey. My rituals are in it. The kind of magic that I have worked with, my collection of the ethics and the rules within which I work. So very much like the Book of Shadow. So why do I call it the Book of the Year? It's taken on a slightly expanded meaning for me over the years. In addition to what you would expect to find in my book, a great part of my book is the collection of meditation pieces and poetry and things which let's just say my goal was to be able to pick up my book at any point during the wheel and have a point of meditation, something to read or think about or to journal on. So this has been growing over time, and last year I actually started rewriting the entire book to capture what it felt like to me now, with the point being, when I wrote my first book of shadows, I was told by my first teacher, of course, that it had to be handwritten, no less that we didn't have any options of doing anything else with it in those days, although I guess we could have mimeographed it or copied it in some way, but he told me that the act of writing it out was, you didn't waste time writing what did not have meaning to you. You only wrote what mattered. You simply don't take the time and the energy to write something that is meaningless. And I was thinking about that, looking at the book of shadows that I was working from and thinking about what it meant to me in this point in my life when a great deal of my working is done as a solitary. And I remembered him saying that you only write what matters to you. And so I began to rewrite my book. And it caused me to stop and think about every single thing I was going to put in it, to decide if it was worth my writing. It made me stop to think, what does this mean to me? Why does this have importance to me? Why do I want to capture this? And it has been an extremely pleasant journey to revisit what I had collected over the years and to decide what was going to be in this new book. And every moment has been a pleasure, and in fact it is in progress. It is not a project which is completed. So I thought I would share it with you to see if there's anything in this that might be of interest to those of you who are collecting your information and trying to decide what kind of formal record do you want to keep. Now I do keep separate journals for meditation studies, for divination. I do keep separate books of correspondence for my herbal work, my incense and oil work, and my stone work. So those things are actually not in my book of the year. But I'll share with you what is in my book of the year. There is nothing about this that I consider to be private. My take on what this book of the year is to me at this point is anyone is welcome when they're in my house, when they are here to visit, to settle down with, spend time with, read, and be inspired by the things that I have collected. So there is no special magical stamp and any secrecy around this, and it is something that, therefore, that I am very comfortable sharing here for you to see. Now, the book of the year for me. I divide my book of the year into the 4 elemental cycles of the year. For instance, we're currently, and this is July, in the cycle of fire, which begins at midsummer and runs until right before, the day before Mabon. So my books are divided by those 4 cycles of the year. So at the moment I have 8 3-ring binders, and I'm going to show it to you, and I will proceed to tell you a little bit about how I'm organizing them and what is in them. And I'm interested to hear, how are you organizing your thoughts and your collections of information and assembling them? So let me do some camera shifting around here and line you up so I can show you a little bit of my current book of the year for this turning of the year, which is fire. So here we are. This is as mundane as it gets. It is not a fancy notebook or bound or decorated. It is fairly plain. And this is one of the 2 books that I have for the fire cycle of the year. For each cycle I do have 2 books. Probably will be going to 3 books before too long, but for now it's 2 books each. And I bought these binders from a warehouse that sells discount photographic equipment. They're actually meant to be photographic albums, and then I just use heavy stock paper on the inside, and I've just printed up a paper that matches the color. Fire is red, and then a burnt red kind of color on the inside. So this is the beginning of my book on the fire cycle of the year. So each of the turning cycles of the year have a set of pre-pieces that are part of the book, and they'll be very similar to some of the things I have seen that some of you put in your books. So there won't be some things here that will be unusual. Some things may be different, so I thought I would just share the front pieces with you. I start off with a book dedication, and for this particular one I actually got it organized and ready to go again, and I'm going to dedicate it at the full moon this month. So I have a dedication at the front. I have a book blessing. I have a devotion page for the old ones, a devotion page to the ancient presence. I have a devotion page for the god and for the goddess. I have a devotion page to the elemental guardians, to my patron Hestia, and also to Parvati. And I have a dedication page to my animal guide, the Canada goose. And I have a pledge of grace, which is a dedication for me as a priestess. And then I have a listing of the pauses for the fire cycle for 2011, so that I organize my thoughts at the beginning of the cycle about the holidays and the timing, where I note the holidays, of course, Litha and Lammas, and the full moons, the dark moons, and in this case, in July, we actually have a black moon. I haven't seen anybody on YouTube do anything about the black moon, so I think when that time comes along, I just might do something. In my tradition, a blue moon is the second full moon in a month, and the black moon is the second dark moon in a month. I'm not a new moon person. I celebrate full and dark, and therefore I also celebrate blue and black moons. So the midsummer and the dark moons, which have already passed in the fire cycle, I actually have temporarily out of the book because I'm working on them. So the next thing that's coming up is the wart moon. And the wart moon, to me, what I do for the moons is every time a moon of a certain month comes around, there are specific things I do on that moon every time it comes around. And the July moon is the wart moon. It's the moon at which I dedicate my herbs again for the year and make my oil and my incense for my full moon rituals for the year and bless them in circle. So that is what I will be doing and in that ritual. So then what follows is the actual ritual itself that I'll be using. And I don't have to share all of that with you, I'm sure, in the sense that we all record our rituals in whatever way is right for us. But what I wanted to show you is then the next thing in my book after I have passed the rituals for that cycle is what I call inspiration. And what that will be is I love collecting charges for the seasons, charges for specific elements, quarter calls that have to do with specific times of the year or specific elements or specific purposes aligned with the cycle of the year, poetry, meditations, all different kinds of things that one would come across that can be used for inspiration. Every night before I go to bed, I read one of them and journal about them. And my goal is to have at least one for every day of the year. And that is what I plan to do to continually expand my book. And it's one of the things I've mentioned to you in other videos that I like even the most modern of pagan writers, because I will, within those pages, if nothing else, I'll find something that just leaps out to me, a poem or a call or a charge or a devotion or a prayer, and I will capture it for my book of the year. And that is very important to me, these meditation pieces. If I want to sit quietly in meditation, I will just go to the next one in the book and spend time with it and write about it and visit it. So it's an important part of what the book of the year is for me, is this collection of all kinds of inspirational pieces that I find. And people know that I like these kinds of things, and over the years I'm constantly have received the most wonderful things from people that they saw something and they thought it was an amazing piece of writing and they sent it to me, and very often they end up in my book of the year. After the devotional, inspirational part of my book of the year is what you would consider to be pretty common for our books of shadows, which is all my correspondences and my recipes and all the witchy bits that we all accumulate over time. So the second of the books of the year for fire for me has all those goodies for fire, all of my correspondences and everything I do, the way I work with, the kind of magic I do, everything that has to do with fire is collected. So I'm at 2 books for fire at this point, and probably will end up going into a third one. So it looks like each quarter is probably going to have 3 of these ring binders. I think they're 2-inch ring binders. I found if I get bigger than that, they are too heavy and cumbersome to hold, and I don't like that. I like something that's very easy to hold and to put on my book rest for when I'm doing ritual. So I thought that I would share with you then what my book of the year is. I don't think there's really anything that's all that unusual about it. I probably have more dedication pages than a lot of you because it is very important to me to reaffirm those devotions. And very often for a meditation, if I am sitting quietly in my room or even during a ritual when I just feel like I need to do something else, is I will visit those front pieces in my book and spend time thinking about each of those devotions and why I wrote them. So the book is personal to me as any book of shadows should be, and probably the only thing that is unique about how I keep these is my collection of inspirational pieces and devotional pieces. So I have shared with you a little bit about the way I organize a book of the year. I wish you mirth and reverence. Mary Part.